Belonging isn't a poster on the wall, it's a nervous system experience. The misunderstanding is that we just include people, they'll feel included. My guest is Dr. Lisa Cherry, whose Oxford research explored how care-experienced adults who are excluded from school make sense of belonging, and whose work helps schools and services move from being trauma-informed in theory to belonging-led in practice. So one of the things that you wanted to kind of talk to me about today was belonging. I know that's a big area of the research that you've done, is that's a big focus for you. So let's start off, if it's okay. When you say belonging, what do you actually mean in kind of simple, plain language? And how would someone know if an individual or a child genuinely feels it?
Well, I think it's probably easier to start off with thinking about unbelonging and unpacking what unbelonging means. And that's something that's going to be very familiar to, well, actually to all of us. You know, on a very kind of micro level, we have all wandered into a space and felt like we didn't belong. We've all experienced being in settings where we just don't fit and it just doesn't work. But for some people, that is on a much more macro level. So we could take examples of, I don't want to start us off in a really, really tricky, heavy space, but the country at the moment, the UK, is particularly intent on ensuring that there are lots of people who don't feel like they should belong here. And that is a very broad spectrum from some political parties saying, even if you were born here, you don't belong here, through to other parties that perhaps we wouldn't expect to make people feel like we don't belong. And, you know, then there's other examples, perhaps thinking about the care experience, moving around from lots of homes and lots of communities, lots of schools, and being involved with lots of different professionals. And particularly my research, which asked the question, how do care experienced adults who were also excluded from school make sense of belonging, really spoke to that sense of movement that is experienced by children in care, and how all of that movement cuts across places, spaces, and faces, which is the model in my book, Weaving a Web of Belonging, which helps us think about how do we cultivate belonging, and places, spaces, and faces, you know, the large structures that we live in, and then you wanted a shorter answer than this, I'm sure, but you know, this is a big question. And then the spaces within those places, and then the people around us. I mean, a child in care is surrounded by so many different adults, for example, at a particular point where you're forming your identity. Which adults are you going to look to? Are you going to look to your social worker, your foster carer, your residential support worker, your IRO, your CAMS worker, your teacher, your SENCO, your designated special teacher? I mean, which adults exactly are you looking to? And when you think about those adults are also in employment, of course, that's different for foster carers, but that movement then becomes even more profound because, of course, people can leave, people go on holiday, you know, and so you have this movement of the adults around you as well. So, yeah, I think when we're thinking about belonging, we have to really unpick and understand unbelonging.
Yeah. And I think you're right there as far as there's a culture of whether you're talking about from a political in-group, out-group, or even just in a school of the in-group, out-group kind of mentality or primitive response, I suppose, isn't it? That you know, that creates that disconnection when you're going into the individuals with care experience who've then been moved around or had adults coming in and out of their lives. I think that's a very difficult concept for most people who've had the kind of more, unless they're having a nuclear family experience, but it's specifically significant, isn't it? And I think even when we look at cross-culturally, obviously there's certain tribes, for instance, where it is much more loads and loads of adults are supporting the child when we're looking at different attachment models, but they're still consistent. In that they're still it's still gran or auntie and etc. It's not just random people coming in and going through a job interview and then suddenly deciding that it's okay for them to be in your life.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things there. I think if you've never had to consider whether you belong or not, that's real privilege. It's like a really privileged position. So if you are listening to this and you've never had to consider your sense of belonging, that is a really privileged position that's worth kind of reflecting upon. And sometimes when I ask people who perhaps have that privilege of belonging, in training settings, to consider and think about the care experience, for example, or to have an experience relational poverty, it's very difficult for people if they've not experienced that to think about those things, because it's very painful to think about, what if all the people that help you feel like you belong and that you love were not here? What would that feel like? Who wants to feel that? I mean, that's really difficult. And I think the other thing that I would say about care experience that's really important is that it's not an experience in isolation. It intersects with other experiences of unbelonging. It intersects with race, ethnicity, culture, neurodivergence, class. It intersects with a lot of other experiences that also are very much about unbelonging.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's a kind of double jeopardy, if you like, in that way. And often, particularly in research, I get very frustrated because things look at care experience. They'll study care experience in research as though it is like one experience, as though you're like nothing else. Like nothing else has happened to you. You don't intersect with any other group. But we know that actually children and young people with care experience, and I can't reel off the statistics right now, unfortunately, but high levels of special educational needs, high levels of coming from another culture or of different race, or whatever, those things have to be taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one part of the question there was, so how would someone know if a child genuinely feels a sense of belonging?
Yeah, well, they'll probably tell you. They'll probably say, this feels really nice. I
Yeah.
like this. I want to stay forever. It's lovely. I think they'll probably tell you. I mean, in terms of how, whenever I've asked any group, what does belonging mean to you? The first word usually that kind of comes up is acceptance. When people feel a sense of acceptance, and they feel like, the other thing that comes up is that they feel like they can show up as they are. So if you wanted to ask somebody, if you wanted to like have that conversation, you could frame it in thinking about acceptance for who you are. Where do you go in the world where you feel accepted and you can be completely who you are? Now, interestingly, in my research, it wasn't always a person. Now, remember, I'm asking adults, not children, so that's completely different. Okay, children need a lot of adults who are absolutely, completely, and utterly in love with them. If they've only got one or two, it'll do, but you need as many as possible. But adults talked about things like they talked about their pets. Somebody talked about poetry. They found a poem that helped them feel completely like they belonged in the world, and they'd never felt that before. So I think there are lots of things that we can think about. Or it might be nature. People talked about nature, that nature gives you that sense of belonging, which I just absolutely love that thought. I feel like that in nature when I'm amongst the trees and the beautiful green and I like expansive spaces that make me feel insignificant, and I feel significant in that insignificance.
Yes.
when you go into a field, I've got a field around the corner, I go into that field, I look out, all I can see is more fields, nothing else, just lots and lots of fields. And so I become insignificant in that because there's nothing else other than these beautiful fields. And those fields have been there long before I was, and they will be there long after I am. But in that sense of being insignificant, I all of a sudden feel quite significant to standing there. So I understand that connection with nature. So yeah, I think it's a really big conversation. And of course, there'll be lots of things. Hopefully the people listening will be thinking about lots of other things that I certainly haven't thought about, that really add to that sense and add to that feeling about where do we feel like we belong. But yes, with children, I don't know. I haven't conducted research with children. My hunch would be that it's much more, their experience is of the adults around them and usually school, right? Those are the two things that where children inhabit their spaces. So I would think those are the things that they're going to talk about. They're going to talk about home, adults around them, and school.
I like that. And there was some beautiful poetry you just gave in there as far as the feeling insignificant and that insignificance making you feel a sense of belonging. I think that's beautiful because again, you're as equal to the tree in the distance. You are not more or less important in that moment. And I think there's a beauty to that. Absolutely. And there's a few things that you kind of touched on there. There was acceptance, one, authenticity, another, being grounded. And I think that being grounded with nature, there's a non-judgmental aspect to that. You didn't feel like you're being judged in any way. The tree is not judging you. The nature is not judging you. It is happy with whoever you are. And I think that's really meaningful. And that kind of leads me on to my next question. So I think there's a lot of adults who sometimes confuse belonging with fitting in. What would you say is the difference and why does that matter?
Yeah. Well, fitting in is you're having to shape yourself to become something, to be to be part of that, whatever it is. And belonging is about not having to do that. I mean, the follow on from, if it's a follow on or if it fits as part of a Venn diagram. No, I think it's probably a deeper way of thinking about belonging that I talk about, but actually is actually being talked about much more in the research space. And a writer called Flett has written edited a fantastic book that takes lots and lots of ways of thinking about this, but is thinking about mattering. So actually, how do we matter? And actually in mattering, the word significance is used, whereas we might think of belonging, the word acceptance is used. In mattering, the word significance is used. How do we feel significant? How do I know that my presence here made a difference? Well, I know because you have to tell me, you have to tell me that my presence made a difference. And you do that in a very intentional way. Fitting in is really trying to squeeze yourself into a space where you don't belong. It's something I've always been particularly shit at, I have to say. And as you go through adulthood, that's a wonderful thing. And you just find your spaces and, it's great. But as a child, it's agony, like as a child and as an adolescent, you have options, don't you? You have to, your behavior is going to communicate very, very quickly the pain that you're in from not being able to squeeze yourself into some sort of rigid way of thinking about who you're supposed to be when you're not that person.
Yeah. It's that authenticity, isn't it? And I know I've been on a journey throughout my adult life that I think I worked very hard to fit in, to be accepted because I didn't feel like I did. And it took me a long time to reach my authentic self, to kind of go, well, I found my tribe or I haven't, whichever one, whoever will take me kind of thing. So I think there's probably a lot of adults, whether care experienced or not, I think there's a lot of individuals who are neurodivergent who definitely have experienced that similar kind of journey.
I would argue actually that it is part of all of our experiences to greater or lesser degrees is figuring out across adulthood who we are. I mean, I don't know about so much about men's cycles, but women's cycles mean very much that if you haven't got to that place by menopause, you've got to that place once, when you're on the other side of the menopause, right? Because it just somehow opens up. I mean, I've heard so many women talk about it once they get to the other side of the menopause, if they hadn't got there already, talking about, that experience of, I found myself, I now know who I am. I'm not taking any more nonsense, this, and it's wonderful. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of being on the other side of the menopause. I say that deliberately because perimenopause is pretty unpleasant for most women, but once you're on the other side, it's an absolute beautiful nirvana of heaven. That just any woman listening who's in the middle of menopause, just know it's going to be beautiful. But you don't have to wait till that point. But I think that is a real wake up time for women who perhaps haven't been able to spend as much time focusing on that self-acceptance journey and getting to know who you are, because they've been really caught up in work and kids and husband and or whatever it is. I mean, I feel very fortunate, really, that that wasn't my experience, in the sense that because of having lots of very unbelonging, really challenging, difficult experiences as a young person and a young adult, that work kind of commenced really early on. And that has been such a gift because, if you're wandering around the world for 50 years, struggling to fit in, thinking you're supposed to fit in, struggling to accept yourself and to feel acceptance from those around you. I mean, life is so short. Like, get on that journey quickly and do it. You don't want to have to wait until you're on the other side of menopause, before you kind of get to that point, because you'll know, because you've been through that experience of finding yourself and self-acceptance, that when you get there, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to not care about what other people think about you, and to know who your people are, and to go and break bread with your people and have a wonderful time. You'll know that, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. I do wonder whether it's, I only found out the other day that, and I think it's human, I don't think it's just male or female, but emotional maturity doesn't happen until 43. And I only found out the other day. I thought, well, that would explain a lot as far as my journey is concerned. Definitely, that emotional reaction to stuff is probably a big factor, a part and parcel. Now, you mentioned your research already, where how do care experience adults who were also excluded from school make sense of belonging? What did you learn about what exclusion does to someone's sense of self and safety?
Really interesting, because lots of people say to me, what did you learn from your research that you didn't know before? And I have to actually say that I didn't learn.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned so much doing the research, and the experience of doing doctoral research is amazing. But actually, what I found, the findings were not hugely outside of what I already knew from 25, 30 years of working in the space, and from my own experience. And now I've forgotten the question because I completely went off on a tangent. What was the second part of your question? What did my research teach me about?
So what did you learn about what exclusion does to someone's sense of self and safety?
So I tell you, a really key learning that came from that was that we will find belonging. And again, this isn't my finding. This is a fun, a kind of universal finding. We will find belonging because it's a universal human need, which the Baumeister and Leary paper of 1995 must have been cited thousands of times, because that's what it found in its systematic review, that belonging is a universal human need, that we will go and find it wherever, right? It doesn't matter if it's healthy or unhealthy, we will find. And of course, people who seek to exploit know this. They understand this really clearly. The nature of coercion itself is very much around removing everything from people, so that you can say to them, but you belong with me, right? But when you have systems that do that, systems that remove everything from people, exclude from school, remove people from their communities, taken from your family, removed from your friends. When schools are, when all of those systems do all of that, then what you're left with is a person who is very vulnerable and who is seeking to find somewhere to belong. Now, if where they find themselves does not provide that properly, then they will find that in other places. And often the other places that they will find them are places that society is particularly judgmental, scathing, and punitive about.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're going to go and end up having to go and find that belonging, or, it comes to you through exploitation, sexual exploitation, ending up in situations that leave you where someone talked about they were sleeping with lots of different boys because they wanted to have cuddles and belonging. You have criminal exploitation, all sorts of things that are, and then of course finding drugs and alcohol, all sorts of things that our society is very, very scathing about.
Sometimes the undercurrent of society, or what's perceived as is negative, and it's the areas of society that are the ones who are often punished or stigmatized or deemed as bad. And what I think what you were referring to there is the grooming models and the coercive behaviors. They immediately feed into people's instinct towards belonging, tribal kind of connection, and all of those kind of factors that are completely natural, and they're just hijacking something that we know works. What I always find interesting on that is that gangs seem to get it right, but care settings don't. It's like they do. The gang doesn't go in and go start doing this stuff for me straight away. They manipulate by befriending, by love bombing, by then kind of then creating isolation and stuff like that. They take it down a very dark route. But then sometimes the immediate instinct for many organizations, whether it be prisons or whatever, is correction first rather than belonging first. And that's so strange, isn't it?
It's very strange. And just imagine if you actually decided that the lens that you're going to do that piece of work started through a belonging lens. It would be a completely different approach.
Yes.
And that work does happen. Let's be honest. It's not that work isn't happening. It's just that, like you say, those who exploit understand how to do it as if they've been on lots of training, right?
Yeah.
I always say to people, that these people have been on lots of my training. They kind of know what to do in a really profound way towards children and young people.
There was something you said earlier as well, which I think there's things significant. Obviously, my specialism around behavior and stuff. And one of the things I try and educate about, you said something really profound at the beginning, which is the need to matter or to feel significant. And I think there's a real misunderstanding sometimes that individuals who use any strategy they potentially can to feel like they matter. And that's why bad attention is sometimes better than no attention at all. That if my only models of the world is to act out in a potentially what we consider to be a maladaptive way, because that's the only time that I actually mattered, that somebody acknowledged me, I was seen for that time period, even if it's through a negative lens, is still better than not existing, than not mattering at all. And I think that's really important for people to be able to understand when it comes to certain behaviors. And that then leads into the other bits you're mentioning there, because when you're looking at any school environment, I often kind of talk about this. You've got the two main factions at school. You've got the good kids, and that's in inverted commas, who are the ones who tend to be really good socially. They know the social rules, whether they're good at sports, whether they're academic, doesn't matter. They know the social rules. So to belong to them, you have to know those social rules too. Whereas on the fringe, the outside of the school community, you've got the ones who will accept anybody. You can belong very easily as long as you're willing to do what they want you to do. And they're those, and that's almost like the school to prison pipeline, isn't it? Kind of the where you can sort of see it almost happening as a result of that. And so, as you said, your research, you kind of already knew that, but that research was something that ingrained it, or you recognize actually this is a measurable thing.
Well, what research does is it gives you nuance. And that's what, qualitative research does anyway. That's what, obviously, if you've got loads and loads of numbers, you have no nuance. But I'm into qualitative research. I'm into lived experience. I'm into phenomenology, right?
Yeah.
When you have, when you do research in that way, then you're gaining the nuance. So I might have sort of thought, yeah, nature is a place of belonging. But actually, when you listen to somebody talk about what that means for them, it provides depth and nuance. So that's really what came out of the research. What made it so beautiful was actually listening to lots of different people's ways of understanding the world and how it made sense for them, and how people make sense of the world is very interesting to me.
Yeah, I love that. And I think majority of your books are about that as well, aren't they? That kind of that kind of expansion on the personal experience of belonging, rather than just the dictionary definition of belonging.
Yeah. What does it mean? What does it look like? What does it feel like? The first question you ask is, how does someone know? How does someone know if they belong?
Yeah.
So, of course, research gives you that opportunity to ask somebody, what does it mean for you? How did you know? How do you know? Do you have it now? Did you have it then? What did it feel like not to have it?
Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today. So and I'm sure you've encountered this in adults as well, but if a child or adult's behavior appears to be like kind of pushing everybody away, what are the belonging questions that we should maybe be asking ourselves instead of punishment questions, as you've already referred to slightly?
And that's the hardest, isn't it? Right? I think it's also the cruelest, because it kind of links in and connects with trauma. Relationships are the answer, but relationships are the hardest thing to access. And it's the same kind of thing with belonging. When the adults around you haven't kind of shown up for you in the way you need them to, and it's risky, why are you going to get close? When the adults all keep changing and you keep moving and everything keeps happening, and perhaps you're being bullied as well, why on earth would you try and belong? Well, who's going to make that risk? Are you, Andy Baker? Are you going to make that risk? You're not going to take that risk. As an adult, you're not going to take that risk, and you're not going to take that risk because you need to survive, right? Because if you start thinking you're going to take that risk, then you're placing your survival in jeopardy. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? You're not going to do that because you need to survive. You have a survival instinct. So I think that's why it's really difficult. Adults looking in, they're just like, oh my God, I've created this safe space. I've done this, I've done that. And they still don't want to, kind of belong, or they still don't want to be part of this, or they still don't want to, not shout at me, or, for God's sake, I'm here all week. So I'm really sympathetic to that position and empathetic to it as well. It's really difficult. And I guess the key things are to not take people personally. Don't take children and young people personally. They're not doing all of that to you.
Yeah.
They're just surviving.
Yeah.
They're just surviving. And the beautiful thing about a school setting is it's a little bit like the fields. It's been there a long time before that child, and it'll be there a long time after. And in that way of thinking, it has a stillness and a certainty and a presence that can just hold that child. If you've honestly done everything that you think that you can possibly do, just keep doing that and let go of the outcome. Because if you keep doing that, that child will become to believe you, and that they are going to be safe, and that their survival is not going to be put at risk.
I know that is something that people find really difficult. One, as you mentioned there, the depersonalization of the child's behavior, because I think we find it difficult. But I'm a good person. Can't they see I'm trying to help them? And I think it's really difficult to kind of, with mentalization kind of side of things, to be able to put ourselves in the mind of the child from that, knowing their experience, their history, but why can't they see that I'm different? As you kind of mentioned there, it must be really, really. I know from personal experience, I find it very challenging sometimes to overcome that.
Interesting. I mean, again, it's not something I struggle with, not taking other people personally, and not taking, obviously I'm in a lot of training rooms, and some people it's not the same as being in a classroom, right? But you're still in an environment where there will be people invariably in the room who don't want to be there, and it's all over their face, right? So hopefully, by the end of the day, they've had a great day and they've forgiven you for taking them out of their workplace to do training. But they're not taking people personally. I mean, you say that you struggle with that, but there are people in your life already that you don't take personally.
Yeah.
That you already think, well, they're tired, or, or perhaps they've had a bit of a difficult morning, or, you already have that in your life. And then there's all the stuff in the, the meso system, the macro system, way out there that, politicians, for example, sorry to do politics again, but, you just think you're just doing your thing. You don't think, why are you doing this to me? Why are you bombing that country? Why are you doing that when you know how flipping distressing it is for me to watch that? So there are already in every kind of area of life, immediate life and in our broader experience of being here, where we already don't take people personally. And so if it is something that you struggle with, I would say exercise that muscle, practice that muscle, practice watching somebody and not taking them personally. Maybe at home is a good place to start. Somebody who's just doing their thing, and in your head you're thinking, you're starting to find yourself going, I've had a really bad day too, why are you doing this to me? Start thinking they've clearly had a really bad day, and I'm just going to be present in that. Just practice it, because if it is something that you struggle with, that's going to be really difficult when you've got 30 people in front of you, 30 developing brains in front of you.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things I think you'll see it all over the place, don't you? When you open the door for somebody, they don't say thank you. People then personalize it, and it's a little bit, oh, how rude of them, rather than maybe there's stuff on their mind, maybe things going on, and it's that one of my fundamental rules I try and encourage when I'm training is developing the habit of becoming a better detective than judge, and But I think as you said, you described it as a muscle there, and that's a perfect way to kind of think about it. That it has to be worked. You don't just then switch into it. You have to kind of, because it's not our default way of thinking. We do tend to be quite centralistic and negative the way we sometimes see the world. When somebody cuts you off in traffic, you're not thinking, "Oh, I bet they're in a real rush." You're thinking, "What a typical Audi driver," or whatever it is you're kind of going into.
You can think both. I think both things.
Yeah.
Oh, you're obviously more important than me, but maybe that's because you are having a really difficult day.
Yeah.
Right? You can do both, right?
That's
maybe
good.
that's part of working the muscle.
Yes.
Actually, is that, you can sort of go, okay, that behavior is really not very good.
Yeah, absolutely.
But maybe this is really difficult for you. Maybe me sitting you next to the radiator and you're overheated in this classroom is causing some of these difficulties. Maybe the fact that I've had everyone sat down for a really long period of time and you're struggling with that. Maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe the fact that, I changed plans about what we were going to do and you really struggle with that is what's going on here. If we can do that, we're also on top of that then harnessing a bit of kindness and a bit of compassion. And I'm not saying that all of that stuff is easy. And if you were somebody who was born with all of that and you've just found all of that easy, that is great. But most people have to work and learn and harness and develop how to do all those things. They come over time. So be really gentle with yourself, be really kind with yourself, but start practicing.
Good. That's a great message. So one of the things that you've spoken about is micro messages. So what are the everyday kind of micro messages in schools and services that quietly tell a child, you're not one of us?
That you're not one of us.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess when people are very ignored, they're not noticed. I mean, I think about the opposite of that. So how do we have those micro messages when we are being really noticed? Again, it's intentional, right? So it's, oh, you said you played football at the weekend. How did it go? Oh, could you look after this for me until next Tuesday? And that way also, that I'm going to be here next Tuesday. Names, the way people look at you or, acknowledge you when they speak to you. I think about, and I often use this example, but I think about when I've been in hundreds of schools and I think about the reception. And receptions that really provide me with a lot of material for discussing this have glass doors, and the really bad ones even have posters on the glass doors. So not only can you not see the person behind you because they're behind a glass door and they're being inaccessible until the door is open, you literally can't see them because they've put posters all over the door. So does that tell me that I matter and I'm important, or does it make my little insignificant me feel like I'm standing there waiting for you, very important person, to open the doors just so that I can ask you? I'm thinking of a year 7 just going into a secondary, thinking that I can ask you, where is my next classroom? I don't know where it is, and this place is really big. So how do we make reception areas say, you belong here and you matter? I've been into amazing reception areas in schools where you have sometimes some nice music playing. They're very light and bright. There's a desk that's open plan. Just really, really nice spaces to come in. And then that you feel that you're somewhere that really wants you. They knew you were coming. I think that's huge. When you arrive somewhere and they knew you were coming, so they've prepared for you to come. So how does a school prepare for people to come? Because they knew they were coming. So I guess from that, you can take some of the opposites would answer your question, in terms of what are the things that make us feel like we don't matter and we don't belong. Well, you didn't know I was coming. You're not treating me as if you know I was coming. You don't know my name. You've barely paid any heed to me whatsoever. I mean, years ago, do you remember all those lovely videos of teachers doing different types of hello to kids as they were coming in the class. I mean, they're just fantastic. You know, I mean, they're a bit old now, some of those videos, but they were lovely. And, you know, just having that presence with people and remembering something about them goes a really, really long way for somebody to feel like they matter and that they're in the right place. You remembered me. I'm in the right place. Yeah.
I think that's it. It isn't a huge thing when we talk about doing like micro messages. I think that, you know, a little. I remember seeing something you described as well, like kind of entry to a school. And I remember when sitting there one time when I was waiting to go and deliver some training, and there was a teacher on the reception door as they were coming in, like, and she knew every child's name. She shook their hand or gave them a little high five and something. Some of them she'd go to go, "Oh, where's your book bag?" And they go, "Oh," and they run off back, grab their mum and grab the book bag and stuff. But it was so welcoming, and I did join the field. But all the children, that little micro gesture, you could see so many of them skipping into the school just from that one little thing of suddenly like, hey, I'm known and welcome. It's as you said, it's that kind of I'm home. I'm in somewhere that I belong. It's a safe. You mentioned it earlier, the spaces, places, and faces. Straight away, this is a warm, welcoming space. This is a place that I belong and a face that I know and who knows me. But it doesn't take an hour. It isn't like when you hear the narrative sometimes. Oh, if only we had time for that. But it doesn't take long to kind of just make that little bit of an effort to kind of connect and stuff like that.
No, and it is an opportunity to do the, oh, they're interesting trainers. And oh, you forgot your book bag. And oh, have you got your pen in your book bag? Or, you know, those little things that are then not the things like the first thing you say to someone, where's your pen? Those trainers, they're not allowed in this school. You know, all of that kind of approach. And again, I realise we're bouncing between primary and secondary a little bit as well in terms of some of the expectations. But, you know, there are ways and means of being able to speak to a child or young person about the things you want to speak to about, but that are in, like you say, in that context. It's so different, isn't it?
Mm. But that's where I think secondary schools like are still archaic in the way that they kind of then manage, because my staff coming into my workplace are greeted by another friendly member of staff. And I tend to sit here with the window open and kind of smile at everybody as they come in, because I want them to feel a sense of belonging within the workplace. And schools are meant to be preparing children for real life, but then they don't actually mirror it properly. In many ways. And those rules that are actually working in primary school, I think would really benefit so many. I mean, secondary schools, some of them are wonderful and some of them are not so wonderful. It's the way they're
I was going to say, we do need to be a bit cautious when we speak about schools as a homogenous group. I mean, yes, there are a multitude of threads that pull them all together, but actually they can be very, very different spaces. And there are some incredible um, places of education that really understand connection, warmth, community, and not only because they understand those things, but they understand that those things are essential for learning. That's what they understand. And then, of course, there are other places of education that really don't have that as their kind of value base for thinking
Mm,
about learning and what we need to learn. And so adopt other methods, which for many children is hugely problematic.
mm. Well, that kind of leads me on to, so obviously you wrote a book, Weaving a Web of Belonging. So what does web of belonging actually kind of look like?
Yeah, well, I guess it's all the things that we've talked about, isn't it? And it's
Mm,
how they all work together. Um, I mean, I love the idea of a web. You know, I'm very into systems,
mm,
so which will have come through, I think, in our conversation. You know, it's not one thing, it's not one person, it's what it all looks like together. It's how it all comes together to create something that captures and holds a person, a bit like a web.
mm.
So that's what that's all about, really.
I love that. Um, you have mentioned some political elements already, but obviously belonging, as you mentioned right at the beginning, is also political, shared by poverty, discrimination, care status is obviously something that you're very passionate about. What do systems need to stop doing if they genuinely want belonging?
Well, the first thing they need to do is to genuinely want belonging, right? And actually center it into what they're doing. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about a lot really is about intentionality, and is about making a decision to do something differently. So the first thing that anywhere needs to do is to intentionally think, we are going to create a space of belonging and mattering for the people within it, whether that's a school, whether that's a workplace, whatever that looks like. And then think about all the aspects, all the domains of that environment, and how you're going to go through each one and think about that from belonging. I actually have a belonging and a mattering audit tool, which I will happily give to you for you to pop into the show notes for people, um, so that they can have a look at that, and then that would provide a way of being able to think about not just where you want to go, but where are you now, um, and how are you going to get to where you want to be, and then to revisit that and think, how did we get there, and have we got there?
Do you think people find it difficult to navigate the difference, or to understand this, the building belonging, but trying to do it without, because sometimes we've got conformity and then we've got belonging. And do you think people sometimes struggle, or is that something that needs carefully navigating?
Well, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Because conformity, of course, um, I would say, is a survival strategy.
Mm,
It's that fitting in
yeah.
stuff again, isn't it? Being able to fit in and conform, if that's going to keep you alive, that's what you're going to do. We hear this from prisoners of war, people who are kidnapped and held for a very long time, um, do things to ensure that they conform to those norms because it keeps them alive. I'm thinking of a really extreme example that was just recently on a podcast, a guy who was a journalist who was kidnapped um, by ISIS. And he started, after a couple of years, he was seen, he's been killed now, but he was seen delivering ISIS messages, and saying that he had it ultimately changed sides. Um, and in this investigation, they were finding, well, actually, that isn't what happened. And most of us would think that's not actually what happened. What he was trying to do was survive. He was conforming. Now, I know that's a really extreme example, but I think it really speaks to what we will do as humans. But what is the cost? What is the cost to you, to your body, to your wellness, to your sense of self, to your sense of identity, in having to conform to something that you either don't understand or you don't believe in? And also it's part of what's expected of us socially. There are all sorts of, would I consider myself a conformist? No, I'm not particularly conformist, but you can bet your life that I know how to navigate being in the world. I don't dance and sing around the supermarket because I know that socially that's confusing for people. So I just tend to walk around the supermarket, because I know that's the social norm of going into the supermarket. You don't shout at people. You don't start singing and dancing. You don't start throwing fruit around, for example. So I know those things. Does it mean that I'm a conformist? No, but I still want to survive in the world. So it's a very, very messy kind of space, isn't it? And I guess that's why it's so difficult with children and young people, because they're not adults yet and they haven't made that exploration. The exploration that we talked about so beautifully in finding out who we are, what do we need, and where are our spaces? Because there'll be lots of spaces where I wouldn't I wouldn't fit in. I wouldn't be able to fit in. And it would be very difficult for me to conform to. There are certain political views that, were I to find myself in a really scary situation, would I be able to conform to that so that I could, you know, um, be able to get through the town, having wandered into some scary march or something? That would be really difficult. Could I do it with a gun to my head? Maybe. I don't know. But that's what punitive measures are, aren't they? They're putting a gun to a child's head, basically, and saying, you know, if you don't conform, then some really bad stuff's going to happen to you. And some children can't do that, and some children can and will do that, but for a cost.
Yeah, that's a big thing, isn't it? That, you know, conformity or obedience or however we're kind of labeling it, um, we can use authority, demand, um, punitive measures to potentially get somebody to conform, but it's what's the social cost of that, and working from a purely from a philosophical morality point of view, veil of ignorance. Which side of that veil do you want to be on? That if you could do that to somebody else, why shouldn't somebody else do that to you? Um,
We only have to listen to adults talking about their experiences if they were particularly perfectionist, or if you know, they conformed and conformed and conformed through school and then through work and then in relationships, and they got to like 40 and went, oh my God, you know, I now have an autoimmune illness because I've never been able to speak or express myself or be myself. There is a cost, but it's just that for some, that's not going to come out until well into adulthood.
well, that kind of ties in with the so. I know you obviously also wrote a book around caring for the people who care lens as well. So when staff are burnt out, and it could be that perfectionist that reaches that point of themselves being the one then caring for others or supporting others or teaching others. Um, so what protects adults so they can protect the children?
Well, my line of work is very much about thinking about caring for the people who work and are exposed regularly to experiences of trauma and loss and grief and all of those things that wash over us every day in the work that we do. So I'm particularly interested in um, systems and settings that acknowledge that and understand that that is part of the work. So, what are the things that we need to put in place to help that? One of them is recognition. The other might be having really good supervision. The other might be, um, you know, allowing people to do some of their own family stuff. Um, the other might be having uh, regular get togethers in teams, not necessarily always big teams, because sometimes that can be too much for people, but smaller team get togethers, uh, team meetings that actually have lots of celebration and hope and nurture in them. You know, there's a whole range of things that can be done in organizations that help and support the people that are doing the actual work.
I suppose that as well as self-care, which I think is so vital. If we have a parent who's listening to this podcast and maybe their child is saying, I hate school, or they are narrating, as you said, like if they belong, maybe they're going to tell you, I feel a sense of belonging, but they're actually communicating, I don't feel like I belong, I don't fit in. What's the first conversation that they can have that actually helps?
Directly with the child
With the
in
child
the
or
office.
anybody, I suppose, who's feeling that. Yeah. With the child. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's always important to keep saying, you belong here. You belong with me. You belong here. And we're going to figure this out together. You know, those are kind of the two key sentences that you might have to say over and over and over again. It's very hard for parents. And I will push back a bit on the self-care stuff because I like to think of collective care. You can only take care of yourself if you have the resources. And I mean, relationally, time, you know, it's very difficult if you don't have those resources to actually take care of yourself. So I'm a big fan of let's get the resources in place. You know, take the focus away from what you can't give yourself and let's get the resources in place so that you can. But with a child, you belong here, you belong with me, and we're going to figure this out together. Where it gets really complicated is if you have a child in a school that doesn't get any of this stuff. And that's really hard because we've seen the outcome of that. One of them is obviously going to be to try and get into a different school, which for lots of parents solves the problem. It really does. But then there's also, if you're quite far down the track, we've got huge numbers of children not going to school. They're voting with their feet. So, there's no easy answers to this, right? I don't want anyone coming away from this conversation thinking that, there's all these easy answers or that, I in any way am trying to simplify some really complex stuff. This is really tough stuff. It's really difficult. And each person will have a different kind of solution that works for them in their community. If you're in a community where you don't have lots of schools to choose from, that's also a bit of a problem, isn't it? But some people will be living in areas where you might have 5, 6, 7 different schools to go and have a look round until you find something that, feels like it's going to do the job. But just start with the basics. You belong with me and we're going to sort this out together. Just bring down that central nervous system to a nice place of grounding. You might have to say it over and over and over again, a couple of times a day for weeks. That's fine. That's all right.
Do you think there is, you kind of mentioned there, like, is it towards a child? Is it towards a school? Do you think there is conversations that families, parents, foster carers, whoever can actually have with schools is it worth raising a school's awareness about this?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I hear so many different stories. It's really difficult to sort of answer questions like that because I've heard parents say the school's not interested, they don't understand, they don't care, right the way through to, oh my God, it was a great experience. Spoke to the school, they've changed everything, they've really made a difference and everything's fine now. So I feel a little bit like I don't really, where to land in all of that. So I guess all you can do is try, and see what the openness is to having a conversation about some of the experiences. Very generally, you don't need to share specifics of experiences, but if you've got a child who's, had a lot of schools, or perhaps you're an adopting parent, or perhaps you've got a child in your care, any of those things, explaining what I've found is that people don't really know a lot about care and about neurodivergence and about, all of those things that really make a difference to development and make a difference to a person's sense of identity and belonging. So the opportunity to have a prolonged conversation, to just explain some of the things that have happened, if there's been lots of moves, and if they're looking blankly, go, and that means that they were at a school on a Friday and then they woke up in another home on a Monday, be really explicit about what that means to have lots of moves, because that's the bit that I find people don't understand. Yeah, they've had lots of moves. Okay, let's break that down. What does that look like? It looks like waking up in a different house. It looks like that different house has lots of different rules. It looks like it's in a different area. It looks like there's brand new adults that are in front of that child right now. So I think sometimes it's a case of just breaking it down a little bit. What does it look like to say, this child's really struggling with this, they've had lots of moves? What does that mean to have lots of moves? Because if you're talking to someone who's never worked around that area or doesn't know anything about that area, they don't know what that means.
Yeah, that's very true. That's quite impactful, actually. I think that'll help me in my reflection as much as anything, because I was in a foster family the other day, and I suppose when you're in it, you're aware of it. So this child had 14 different placements in a period of 3 years or something like that, which is just immense. And obviously that girl is desperately rejecting any belonging because she's never belonged anywhere. So it's, and because I've been in that world for a long time, I suppose it's easy to understand what that is. But actually, for many people, as you said, the privilege of always belonging and never experiencing it, that doesn't mean they're bad people to not really get what that is and what that isn't, or what that loss is like, and the constant ongoing grief that an individual is going to experience, but also the ongoing fear of the new environment and the new circumstances, the new rules I've got to follow, and the uncertainty that comes with that is massive, isn't it? So, well, Lisa, it's been a genuine pleasure talking to you. I feel like I've picked up some fantastic little tips in there and some really important bits. And hopefully anybody listening, whether they're adults, a child, supporting children, whoever they are, because I don't think this is something, obviously our podcast goes out to children but also adult carers as well, or those caring for adults, even those living with dementia. I think sometimes that sense of belonging is something so important and fundamental to build everything out from, that people should remember. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I've actually had a really lovely time talking to you. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. And you did so well considering the jet lag. So no judgment. So for all of you listening out there, thank you very much for joining the conversation that we've had. And hopefully you found some bits really meaningful and useful. So obviously we'll make sure there's some details to reach out to Dr. Lisa Cherry in the show notes. The audit that she mentioned, we'll try and make sure we've got a link in some way to that so you can access that. But otherwise, please, anybody you think might benefit from listening to this, a parent, a foster parent, a carer, or a child themselves who may be struggling, then please like, comment, and share.